Okay, now in this video we'll be reacting to are Genshin villains even good? Or are Vengeance actually good? In my opinion, it obviously, I think that probably there are some good villains in Genshin, there are also some like bad villains. I really think I'm gonna assume maybe World Quest villains are here, but I'm gonna also assume it's gonna be mainly arc conquest villain or main story quest villains, because yeah. I saw Tutorial on the thumbnail, I saw Senior, I think, and then Raiden. I think I saw Senior. Either way, we're gonna watch this. I will say, by the way, as I'm recording this, the heat wave in the UK is so bad that recently today, basically got, what, I just got a heart attack while watching a video, simply because, for some reason, I got an alert about wildfires being started in the area, like, you know, I think, well, Wembley also got put on like fire because the wildfires, it's just too hot. So got that, I had to read, I was like, what the frick is the alert for? Yeah, so really, yeah. Really not a good time to be in the UK, to be honest, with all this heat wave going on. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it.
What makes a good villain? Is it consistency in their schemes, the ability to capture an audience attention, a good design, or a backstory so well written you can understand why they...
I'm not gonna lie, if a villain's design was shit, but they were a good villain, I feel like not much people would consider them a good villain. So design does probably impact their lot.
Chose the path they took. Villains are the center of every game, and sometimes they're more popular than the actual heroes, which is the case for the hit game Genshin Impact. But does Genshin...
To be honest, the only thing I see villains being more popular than actual heroes. I mean, here, let's be honest here, Eve is not my favorite character in the game by far. Or do you mean? Either way, what's I gonna say? Yeah, either way, for example, the only show I've ever watched, obviously not a game show, that I've watched is Overlord, but where I'm basically only rooting for the villain. Well, the villain in the human sense anyway. I'm only rooting for the villain, and that's the only show or anything I've actually rooted for the villain, because it obviously focuses on the villain.
Actually have good villains, or are we just eating whatever they serve? So let's talk about if the Genshin villains we have so far are good, or they're not.
But yeah,
well, actually, before we get into it, I just want to give a quick little disclaimer. All of this is just my opinion, and this video is completely opinion-based.
It's opinions-based.
And nothing should be taken to heart. It's totally fine if you have some...
I'm not gonna lie, every time someone says it's opinion-based, let's be honest here, the comments don't give a shit. They'll just still play, oh, you're wrong, and they just start criticizing the video.
I would love to hear it. But please just remember that, again, this is all my opinion, and nothing should be taken too hard.
Probably get my
so to really start off this video, I want to talk about the main villain
that
we have in Genshin for Chapter 1 at least, Phanes. Also known as the Primordial One, also known as the Heavenly Principles. Phanes is what happens when you mash together the Conqueror's villain archetype with the man behind the curtains archetype. Phanes is constantly being shown to us as a supreme evil ruler who keeps getting worse with each passing quest. This leads us to hating Phanes even more and more, and makes us question, who are they? And are they really asleep? And
but
what
it
is
also
their
makes us
so curious
if the Heavenly Principles it doesn't end up being all that she's cracked up to be, but I there will be such a downplay.
An indescribable amount of questionable things like dropping celestial nails on top of lands, killing civilizations as punishment for forbidden knowledge. And unlike the Abyss, the Heavenly Principles
I think most forbidden knowledge is just stuff that can go against her.
Knowledge. And due to this, it makes forbidden knowledge so much more interesting, as it makes the story so much more...
As that, I mean, for example, this video is out before Season 9. Season 9 quite spoiler, if you guys don't want to skip forward. Basically, the curse of death from Renova's only triggered when they reach a breaking point that can basically hurt the Heavenly Principles or hurt, celestial beings or whatever. And the curse of death trying to stop humans from being able to get to that point. Probably similar to what happened to
since we know the consequences of forbidden knowledge from what we've seen with Ruka Devada, and the way you're able to build so much off an event just from a single entity, it's honestly impressive. And when we think of a good villain, we see how impactful they are to the story, and granted they are since they're made the main villain, so they kinda should be, but I hope you get the point I'm making here. Phanes has quite a few theories surrounding them, like the possibilities of them being AI, which I'm not too entirely sure on this theory, but from my interpretation, I feel like it'll just be a god who believes they offer Teyvat's salvation, since since they got rid of their king who was infected by the Abyss. But this isn't the time for theorizing, but if you want to hear more about my theories, make sure you subscribe. Anyways, the Heavenly Principles aren't written like some type of villain that hates everyone and everything and wants to just rule the world, but instead we have this creator who has no problem annihilating and punishing those who break its laws, but also refuses to let the world plunge into darkness. So thankfully,
I haven't watched this
more
video
of a
to most, like the
so
actual
far.
like
Now,
video.
I've
just
and Heavenly Principles are meant to be sole enemies, as they always rival the Heavenly Principles' authority, but I want to ask you the question, what's your interpretation of the Heavenly Principles? But when you have such a mysterious villain, there comes a lot of problems, like leaving room for so much disappointment. And we know how easy it is to make us Genshin fans disappointed, but the Heavenly Principles have a lot to live up to. But from what we can tell so far,
that's why I said, like, if it doesn't live up to the way, then wait, it's like all hyped up to be like this. For example, let's say it's similar to the tutorial, we've already done tutorial battle, it wouldn't be thingy, it wouldn't be insane because we've already done about similar.
It's good writing there. But I can't say too much about them since, once again, their intentions are unknown and there's so much we don't know about them. But the way they're building up the Heavenly Principles, I just had to include them in the video. But as of right now, they're severely intriguing to me, and I can't wait to see more of them, making this a pretty good villain so far. But who knows, it may not even be a villain, but I don't think there is justification for half the stuff they do, so yeah, it's still falls into the villain category.
I mean,
right
there's
now,
no justification. Like, literally, the only thing you can look at to know the Heavenly Principles or the Shades or whatever are not good is the Curse of Immortality. Let's say the comrades did do, like, you know, they obviously used the Bishop Power, etc. You can kill them. Unless there was something in the law which prevented them from being killed, but I'm pretty sure they were just cast for immortality or whatever. There's probably a trigger there, there's probably a trigger for the curse of immortality, like the curse of death, I would assume, maybe. But you can just kill them. You don't have to curse them. The fact that you curse them, yeah, that's what's messed up.
That we got out the way, let's talk about our,
and if anything, curse them make more more shit for to fight anyway.
Unfortunately, and a victim of the early game's terrible pacing, but don't get me wrong, I was really fascinated by her character. La Senora was one of the first antagonists we had in game, and honestly, she delivered that whole mysterious, powerful villain that you'll fight later in the game. I mean, her outfit had that classic cloak cape hanging off of her shoulders, and I think a lot of people really loved this design, as we see it a lot in Genshin.
Have you ever played a game that uses AI throughout the entire experience?
No.
The moment you enter this game, you can...
And overall, I think the game did a phenomenal job at capturing players' attention with having this mysterious woman show up and take the gnosis from someone who we just learned was a god.
I'm not gonna lie, it did a job of pissing me off all the time. Because every time she got the gnosis, it wasn't due to fighting or anything, it was due to, like, for example, Venti being weak, which we even know back then, back when Venti explained, she could have, like, basically defeated Signora, but at that time it could have also damaged one set, and he didn't want the gnosis anyway. And then John Lee basically made a contract, didn't do a thing. The moment she actually had to fight for it, she died. And then Snez Knight showing me feel sorry for her with the whole Odette thing. And I'm like, no. You can't.
Before, many players knew that he kind of let her take the gnosis, but we're not talking about that right now. But as we know, first impressions are important, and she had a pretty impactful one. But after her little aura farm, it kind of went downhill for there, as her screen time was very limited, and they put a huge sign on some other harbingers. Anyway, they introduced Child, and he was more of the focus, which is understandable since Senora wasn't the one getting her hands dirty, but I wish we would have saw more of her working behind the scenes, or maybe the conversation she had with Zhongli before we arrived, so we can learn
I do hope maybe we see that in a flashback with, like, every gnosis getting collected, or however gnosis that in the game,
In Inazuma, we learned that she was assisting with the distribution of the delusions as well as striking deals with the Kanto Commission, and I liked how we kept running into her as she kept causing trouble from one region onto the next. But once again, she was only mentioned in dialogue, but again, this was making it seem like she was incredibly smart and careful with the cards she was dealt. And one of the main factors I enjoy with villains is consistency, which they quickly ruined when we saw her again. Senora immediately felt like the stereotypical villain, letting her ego get in the way when she stood before.
I'm not gonna lie, the fact that, like, I am kind of happy they did end up killing a Harbinger, because, like, no Harbinger ended up paying the price. It would have been like, oh, they kind of can't die. Obviously, we got Dottore dead, hopefully fully dead. But, for example, Signora's the first Harbinger that died. It makes sense that Raiden's the one to kill her. If it wasn't Raiden, I would suspect maybe Marika. Like, maybe. because obviously it's the nature of war, etc. But it made sense that Raiden was the one to kill her. I can't remember if this was Raiden's puppet or like it's not going to my brain right now. I can't remember, it was so long ago. But it makes sense that Raiden was the one to kill her. Anyway.
The Shogun. We run into Senora as she's trying to obtain the Electronosis, and the Traveler comes in and challenges her to a duel before the throne. Now, she was instantly surprised at this and scoffs and tries to make the Traveler double down, but ultimately, she accepts the duel. Now, I will say, I think she genuinely believes she'd win, but to be honest, she knows about the Traveler's strength by now after what happened in Liyue and Mondstadt, but this is where she fell victim to the classic villain arrogance. But what I really did enjoy is how she shown fear at the end.
I'm pretty sure, I don't know, like, everyone knows, but I'm pretty sure a lot of our stories, like, revealed in, like, a book or something. Or something. I know, like, people know the story from, like, something. I can't remember exactly
what. So I think Senora had a pretty good build-up for making her rather mysterious and an evil orchestrator, but unfortunately, she was cast out the game quite quickly without having her have more scenes in Inazuma, which I wish she would have had more scenes showing her inner thoughts or outside of the Crimson Witch persona. And I say inner thoughts because I don't expect her to let her guard down in any of these regions, since Harbingers are notorious for being feared, or, well, the Tatsuya in general.
I guess, like I said, this is before... Oh, so this is what I'm talking about, the law thing. This is before Sesnile, like, acts and stuff. So, like, Shiora does get her in a monologue through, like, Odette's, like, letters, etc. We get to see how she, like, after her getting this, like, Geonosis, etc. It also, I'm, like... I'll talk about it later, actually. I was gonna say the fact that, like, some Archons may or may not be working with, like, the Sarisa. I know that's a good theory, and I kind of like the idea. Especially considering, like, we know the Sarisa and Venti were close, but considering Venti's words, they had a falling out or they stopped talking, so,
How her delusions was meant to calm her flames, and it was reflected on her personality as we see her calm and collected, or should I say she appears as cool. Get it? Because she was, like, cool when, like, she was, like, unleashing, like, the cold. So she was, like, cool, because, you know, when we first heard her delusion was cryo. Anyways, this is why I kind of wish she had more of her characters shown. So I did enjoy her short interactions with others, since she seemed like a cool villain who acted on her god's accord. Looking back now, she was quite literally just a chess piece in this story that made a few good moves, but was backed into a corner and knocked out. I rate Senora, unfortunately, a 4 out of 10. But what I really did like was her...
I mean, it's just to show us, like, she's what? I think she's the 9th? Yeah, I think she was the 9th to be Harbinger, I think. I can't know. What rank was she? Was she the 8th? Yeah, I think she was the 8th. So she's not even that high ranking, and probably not, like, biggest combat wise. I know, like, the rankings don't necessarily mean combat wise or smart wise, etc. I don't exactly know what the rankings, like, how the rankings is produced or whatever. I had no idea, but yeah.
Best, since it was kind of symbolic, since she burst out in flames and let everything out until she was extinguished for the final time, where she would now join her lover in the afterlife.
I also love how we never, like, instance Naya recently, or that last war if I was, I knew it was something like filthy or something, or scum or whatever to us. You filthy rats. We should have said that. We should have said, you filthy rats. That was the last words. I think that's what she said then.
Raiden's Shogun is an interesting case, as it's one of those I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, but quite literally everyone around her was suffering. But to be honest with you, this whole trope is kind of boring to me, as I see it so often. Raiden, or well, A, is a prime example of a flawed god, as gods are mainly depicted to be perfect.
Oh yeah, flawed
I
god.
would be lying if I didn't say she
had
then
again, I think like basically
she was the first god to approach us with supreme rule over her nation,
to some
and
extent.
initially it changed the game's direction as we go into this region and we can't even freely roam as we're under strict law, so instantly it makes the stakes so much higher, and honestly clicks players because I'm sure we all sat up to see Raiden step down to us, so she gets intimidation points. As she was about to kill us not even an hour into the region.
I think that's probably the first intimidating thing the Traveler went against.
Character has constant fear over
in my head anyway.
It means they're doing something right. But when we actually meet the actual Archon, I was so happy they didn't go with the she wasn't aware of what was going on, but she had full knowledge and she wasn't oblivious to anything, so that was quite enjoyable to me. And I personally thought we were gonna have to fight her all the way down to low HP before someone saves us or she kind of beats our butts or kills us. And I always enjoy boss fights like this since it's hard to make bosses intimidating in gacha games because you're going to be seeing that boss used as a showcase by the next day. But during our final fight with Raiden, we get to know that she was just a childish Archon. Now, locking herself away is usually a coping mechanism for grief, but she did fail to understand her people were suffering because of her actions, and it really puts into perspective she was never fit to be an Archon despite her undeniable strength, but she lacked openness to
she had
change,
to replace her
communication,
sister,
and some other qualities of a god or a leader. And the way they wrote her was quite enjoyable since she was basically in the shadows for so long and had to be brought into the spotlight since her sister was just doing all the work in the light. But overall, she elevated the story and our expectations for the rest of the Archons, and obviously she had a big impact on the game just by her banner sales. Now, I also really did enjoy that.
I can definitely see like Raiden and that working with the Saritsa. I know the Raiden's probably the least Archon to work with the Saritsa, considering what she was up to these past years. But I can definitely see that because didn't she lose her sister in Comria? I don't exactly remember the whole how she lost her sister, but I believe it was around Comria, or at least the time, something about that.
Making a parallel to Raiden and Wander, and it was kind of cute to me as they both had several people around them die and they locked away their heart because of it. Main issue with Raiden falls under the whole Inazuma story as things were happening a bit too quick, but I wish Raiden's reasoning for allowing the Vision Hunt decree was a bit smarter, as I feel like taking visions is more of a threat to eternity, as visions are a person's ambitions and you're stripping that away, and we can kind of guess where that would lead to. But Raiden was overall nicely written to me because on the surface we see this demanding god who's just controlling and makes people fearful of her, but deep down she's just someone who has to adapt to take the role of an Archon, while she grieves her sister trying to preserve a nation so it never has loss again. Although in her eyes her intentions were good, she falls into the anti-villain category. I think what I really disliked about Raiden though was her disregarding the Gnosis. I mean, I feel like an Electro Gnosis would kind of help protect Eternity, but she said there was no use for it, and if anything it would pose a threat. The one thing that confused me is she draws a line
from the look of like Cesar. I remember him Cesar a lot because obviously we recently. The Gnosis are probably a curse for the Archons. I know it gives them more power, etc., and for Celestial stuff. But it's probably also to keep an eye on this world, especially considering we know that it will be used as a sort of bargaining chip in some kind of way. So Gnosis is probably like maybe even a curse for the Archons. Just like for their power, they get cursed for their power, etc. Something like that. I can never see that.
Not the Gnosis, but lets the production delusions happen.
So I can see why they didn't really want to.
And I don't know if it was just to show that she wasn't the smartest, or they didn't know how to write taking away the Gnosis from her, considering her strength. But let me know what you think of that. But overall, I think Raiden's villain rating is a 7.5 out of 10. But on the topic of Inazuma, we have
I don't think of it, even though
I mean everyone, including you, because we all know that Scaramouche was your favorite villain. Honestly, Scar's villain arc wasn't the best to me, but that's not to say he was the worst. It honestly just made Dottore a better villain since Scar was a victim of his manipulation. And his whole character was how unbalanced can lead to issues like truly believing you're on your own and not being able to form connections to people, which explains why he had a bad relationship with his coworkers and didn't care for humans as much, as all he ever experienced was abandonment from them. They really did keep on theme for him being a puppet, as Dottore was literally the puppeteer, and even though he had his redemption, he still had a hard time forming connections, but Hoyo was actually developing his character, and we were able to see him have connections with Durin and Paimon, and an attachment to Nahida. But during his villain arc, we had a few moments where he felt like this villain we had no way of winning against, since the first time we saw him was in the 1.1
especially when he was like, especially, I didn't see this event, so I never knew this was a thing, but especially when he was basically, when we were talking to him, and we were but after we looked inside his head, etc., to learn his backstory a bit, he was in his ghost form. We definitely looked in. That's probably like the most intimidating thing about it. When it was like the robot star was there, but when he was like in his ghost form looking at us, I think that's like probably the most intimidating bit about it. I just remember that scene in my head.
Or when he showed up at the Delusion Factory, but quickly had his spotlight taken as Yai walked in, but he did have his moment.
Although, like, that scene, like, where he's basically, like, giving or something like that, where he says, definitely felt a bit cringe, and, yeah. Like, what is this guy on about?
Has created a multitude of fans, which goes to show how Genshin is at capturing attention for a character whom we know very little about. Now, as we know, Scaramouche was originally a puppet for the Raiden Shogun, but A viewed him as more of a human due to his emotions and set him free. But despite his efforts, he was still too weak to become a god, even when he suppressed his emotions. But honestly, there's not too much to say about his character, as I feel like they put a lot more effort into his redemption arc. Well, they actually did put a lot more effort into his redemption arc. So I think he was more about a character character that was going to be redeemed, and they want to focus on that, which there's nothing wrong with it, since his redemption arc is really nice for the most part.
Yeah, I feel like out of redemptions in Genshin, Scaramouche is probably #1. Just because I can't think of an actual villain playable. Maybe not.
That's 2 generations out of.
But I can't like examine his villain arc too much, and that's pretty much all there is to it, of him, you know, being abandoned and turning evil. That's just kind of how his character is. But if I'm wrong and you have a deeper analysis on Scaramouche, especially if you are his day one fan, please let me know your analysis on Scaramouche. I rate Scaramouche a 6 out of 10. More
people may hate that, but then again, it isn't ranking his character like as a whole. It's just his villain persona. Like Scaramouche for me is a really I love his character so much. He's probably one of my favorites. But as a villain, I guess that makes sense because we do see more better villains, and I think a reason behind a lot of villains that actually are good is that for their motivation. Like, if the villain has a good motivation, if they just basically do it for the love of the game, whatever, motivation does definitely increase, how good of a villain it is. I feel like villains who don't have a sad backstory, but just do it for, the sake of it, can be good, depending on how they're written.
A 5 out of 10, we'll say 5.5 out of 10, since I feel like most of the work for Scar has been done on his redemption arc, which there's no problem with that, it's pretty good, but for his villain arc, it didn't get me too interested. He did have a few awful moments,
I feel like I started to like him when he was in his redemption arc, to be fair.
Is a villain that was prominent in a lot of regions, and I'm grouping them all into one, and the villain I'm talking about is the Abyss. The Abyss is possibly one of the best villains we have in Genshin right now. Now, before I talk about this, I just want to make clear that I'm separating the Abyss from the Abyss Order, since I think the Abyss Order has way too much mystery for me to come up with a definite analysis on them. As of right now, there's a lot of mystery surrounding them, so we'll probably get a lot more information in SNES, so I'm just leaving that as is right now.
Hoping so.
The Abyss on the surface is
I can see Austin start hearing his somehow.
So far, we don't know too much about the Abyss other than a few keynotes, like how it was able to counter Natlan's tribe's defense mechanisms, hinting that the Abyss may work as a hive mind. But what really captures my attention with the Abyss is the mystery, as Hoyo throws in bits and pieces of lore about it and leaves it vague.
Thing is, when I was first starting Genshin, the Abyss and Abyss Order, I kept getting them confused because when they're basically, obviously the Abyss Order use abyssal power and Abyss is abyssal power. So yeah.
It attracts certain people and pulls in people who harbor strong emotions or ambitions. We see this from Child, who was an adventurous boy who fell into the Abyss and was completely warped as a person. And in Natlan, he was able to drain so many heroes' morale, making them lose hope or even their lives. Or when Nibelung wanted to search for a way to save everyone and was corrupted by the Abyss, becoming a little evil. And I think the Abyss eating away out of heroes' will is such a cool concept, as I really enjoy darker force of pure evil just lingering in the shadows. The Abyss villain rating is a question mark out of 10 for me, but so far 8 out of 10.
I think this guy plays Lumine because he keeps using Aether as an abyssal parent, so I'm assuming he plays Lumine.
Full intentions yet. But since it is an abyss of hatred, it not only targets heroes, but villains as well. We know that the sinners accepted the power of the abyss, and here's where it gets really cool to me, as one of the main traits of a hero is their selflessness, and one of the main traits of a villain is their selfishness. I think Genshin is doing a really good job at building up a dark force that doesn't have a reason other than being evil. But to me, this is great writing, as there's so many theories surrounding the abyss, but the abyss...
I'm really hoping the other series are so much more I love Rare. But 100%, the other sinners, I cannot wait to meet them. I'm assuming, because Rare wasn't at his full strength, I'm going to assume the others will be such much difficult challenge. For example, Rindle was literally a shade, and the other sinners like Sociology and stuff like that, and the Visionary are going to probably be people we can't even comprehend. But that makes you question, are they stronger than the Heavenly Principles? Because it seems like we're going towards the Heavenly Principles as of right now in Scenario. So that makes you question, are these people stronger than the Heavenly Principles then, if they're not going to be focused on now? Because if we fight them off to defeat the Heavenly Principles, chances are we can defeat them, which is probably not going to happen.
It's just so convoluted that each theory is something so different, which I love. But for the next villain, we have the infamous villain, the Torre. Okay, I personally love the Torre, and by love, I mean how interesting he was.
I love him as a character, 100%. hate him as a person.
I love the character, obviously. And some of you may be throwing tomatoes at me right now because you're tired of seeing that man, but he really did shake up the story. Dottore was the prime example of how one of the main flaws of intelligence is underestimating the people beneath you.
Not gonna lie, I know he like pre-appears a lot in a World Quest or whatever, his name shows up a lot. I think the only time I actually felt like, oh my god, Dottore is probably Don't Cry, and that's if you obviously don't read the manga, etc., right? But even then, like, the manga's just like, every time you feel a holiday, you think of what Dottore's done. But, yeah, but No Cry definitely, like, boosted his character a bunch, and then obviously, the Sumeru event that
Writing
happened
is honestly
after.
pretty good, as they went with the Mad Doctor archetype, and writing this type of character isn't hard, as you basically just have this scientist willing to experiment on people and take a fascination on some really morally questionable things. But what
He's a scientist, but he's also a dropout, so, yeah.
him apart from this classic character is his acceptance to failure. Constantly see Dottore fail with his experiments, whether it's in the webtoon or story, and he finds amusement from it rather than immediately losing his composure and going berserk. I truly did believe he played his cards
It's also
right
different
at the beginning
segments
when
of
he was trying
Dottore,
to
so
form
I guess more
connections with
people
his
would
fellow
be
harmagers, so he
like,
could use them for his
would
own
not
personal
like,
agenda,
you know,
like how he was
find
trying to
amusement in
manipulate
it.
Columbina to experiment on her, or form an alliance with Arlecchino so he can continue experimenting on the Hearth family. And we also see him trying to form an alliance with his enemies, the Traveler. His whole conversation with the Traveler was trying to make them seek answers and break away from constantly saving everyone to think for themselves for once. I feel like Dottore exposing the Traveler to the truth and what they've always been thinking in the back of their minds is a nice way to help the main character develop a bit, because God knows they need it. But overall, in my personal opinion, one of the main skills that can determine how good a villain is the ability to form connections. And because of that, he was able to achieve the second half of his plan to burn Irminsul. Now,
That event was like,
I feel
that event wasn't the best, but the end, like, probably the last, well, not the last hour, but the last, like, 20 minutes before the last hour were the best bit, and, like, it was really sick. That whole Dottore fight. Obviously, it is Sumeru, and so I don't mind Sumeru, don't get me wrong. The cast is sick and all that. In Sumeru, there is so much talking. Obviously, it's good for so much lore, but someone's like just waffling and yapping and doesn't really like mean anything. Like, I get like having constant fight stuff bad, not good, but apart from that, so much talking for stuff that we basically like. I'm pretty sure we spent like 2 hours just talking or whatever. Which then again, it just means that Dottore was obviously Dottore did that whole thing, so it makes sense. And in Senai recently, I was like, please say it's not like Sumeru, just constant talking. I still enjoyed the quest, don't get me wrong, and I really enjoyed the quests. Like, they're really good quests, and I really enjoyed a lot. But I thought people would hate that murder mystery quest in Senai recently, because I was like just so much talking in there for like 2 or 3 hours. I thought people would hate it, but I'm surprised like a lot of people thought it was like peak and good. I personally thought it was peak and good, 100%. But I thought a lot of people would hate it, which I'm surprised about, that they don't. Then again, I think the Renova stuff definitely saved it, so a lot of people are praising it because of that, maybe.
Dottore won, but not in the way he wanted, despite them creating a new Irminsul. The flow of fate has been changed, and now new possibilities have emerged, which indirectly contributed to the process of fixing the imbalance between gods and humans. And he was also able to ascend, which pretty much is what he wanted, and he was able to conduct his experiments. But even him trying to form alliances, he was defeated by people working together. Now, I know a lot of people dislike seeing Dottore for a second time.
I mean, he was defeated by
honestly,
basic
I feel like the
Columbina,
second part of like Dottore's like boss and whole arc was them building up something for Pantalone. Dottore and Pantalone's conversation really solidified that Dottore won in the end.
After this, I constantly just kept getting like Pantalone and bring Dottore shit, so I'm like, what the fuck?
He expressed how results are the most important part of an experiment, and he doesn't regret what he did at all. And I'm really sad that a lot of players overlook this part, as we have a villain who actually won in the end, and on the surface, we have this nice happy ending, with Columbina being back and claiming her Trilune authority, as well as Nahida being able to heal from Irminsul burning. But despite that, Dottore was able to achieve blasphemy and change the god's fate. But one thing I really do appreciate about villains is, despite their death, I love seeing the consequences of their actions affect the world or the main protagonist's journey. Dottore's villain is a 7 to 8 out of 10 for me.
Pretty sure also it's nice that they put his lore in some like world quests or event quests. It does spread it out a bit more. It doesn't have to necessarily have to take up Archon quest time. The fact that they put it in like world quests or thing, because you can do it and learn more about it if you want to, but it doesn't have to take up the Archon quest time. And it will make you appreciate the characters a bit more. Like, for example, we learn about Zandique or whatever, asked questions at the temple for something or whatever and gave the answers. at the temple, like I think a long time ago, and that gets brought up in the event quest.
I want to talk a little bit about Rary here, and his ending to me, I didn't mind it as much, but obviously there was a flaw with it, which I'll get into later. And I know a lot of people dislike Rary's ending, but let me know what you think about Rary's ending.
I like Rary. It was that, like the only thing that Rary, I can see why people hate, is because he's meant to be one of the 5 sinners. But at the same time, I don't think he recovered at all fully. I think he recovered at probably at most 50%.
Well, we're gonna
might be like 20%. But if you could consider that he wasn't fully recovered and we were struggling that much, the other sinners are gonna be crazy. So he's just there probably to build up to the other sinners. And now that we know he wasn't even like fully powered up, I'm pretty sure he still wasn't fully powered up by the end. I could be wrong. But either way, we know basically the other side's going to be way more powerful than Rary. So he's probably there simply just to build up. Also, take out when he was blinded by rage consistently, the other sinners will be smarter and not just like full-on fights, most likely. So that Rary is literally just there to build up for the other sinners. And yeah, I'm pretty sure even back in the day, he was the weakest of the sinners. Makes sense.
Right now anyway. We're going to be talking about Rary's backstory to get into it, because his backstory is one of the main things of what really inspired his whole villainhood and why the writing was so great. Rary was a selfish man who wanted the best for himself and not the Lindis. He chose to side with his own ignorance.
He's like backstory about you can't get it was crazy.
Rary was a man tasked with getting rid of a bloodline from a king who was obviously not right in the head. Rary represents how people carry out dirty jobs for their own personal benefit and how they excuse their actions by it. And we got to hear his personal thoughts, which is what I wish we heard from Senora, and I think one of the best scenes we got to really emphasize that he's a terrible person was him going through the list of deceased Crimson Bloodline members. And we can see him questioning himself, which I'm glad they added a character with that, which is a bit more realistic. But throughout his story, he slowly gains his humanity back and allows Chad to escape death, which of course is the bare minimum, but not for this dude.
He only actually had an outrage the moment he realized his wife was going to be killed, that his wife had to be killed. The only time he went to start rebellion was the fact that his wife was going, or soon to be wife, was going to be killed, not the fact that obviously he felt guilty for the kids. He did, of course, at the time, like he questioned it, but he only actually signed up. So I thought it was wrong because his wife, like soon to be wife, was basically going to be killed. That's the only thing he was able
to recall was the Lindis, his lover. Rary was just an empty shell when he returned, but I'm glad he wasn't treated as a normal villain, as they needed a plan against him, since most of the fights they had with him, they were obviously getting overwhelmed. So I'm glad they didn't downplay his power, aside from Yehoda shooting a shot and blocking his power, but I feel like that just further proves that Yehoda is secretly the Animal Archon, but
he also didn't block his power, she just like slightly
issue with this whole arc of Rary is they made Columbina more of his enemy, and I think it was supposed to be a whole representation of light versus darkness, but I wish they would have utilized Dainsleif more instead of using Columbina, since
I would have loved to see like Dainsleif fight Rary. Obviously at the end we got to see it, but like, I don't know why they didn't, because Dainsleif's whole thing is basically getting revenge on the sinners. Obviously he felt sorry and he wanted to know more, etc. That's the only bit we get about Dainsleif. I'm so annoyed we didn't get like Dainsleif actually fighting Rary. That was such a missed opportunity. They could have made basically all these people losing, right? Dainsleif has to step in and defeats Rary, and literally just has his revenge on one of the sinners of Comria. That's his whole thing, getting revenge on the sinners of Comria. So the fact that he didn't, obviously like I said, he didn't know what Rary had to think, so he kind of wanted to, and by this point he was questioning whether he actually wanted to get rid of Rary, or he wanted to actually fight an old friend. But obviously by the end he decides to, and sees the pool open. But it's still so annoying that the fact that we couldn't get Rary versus Dainsleif. I'm so hoping next time we see a sinner, let's say Dainsleif is in Sense9, for example. Dainsleif versus Rheindold would be so sick. 100%.
I feel like Columbina had more of a time to shine against Authore, but the whole dynamic between Rary versus Columbina, it was interesting to me, but I wish it would have had more of Dane in it. And I would have really enjoyed him and
I do
Rary to
like
have
the
more
fact that
interactions
basically
together, but
they all
slightly
had
made
to
up for
fight
it when
him.
Rary saw Dane
No, Sarge
again
go
when he
find,
went into
like,
the portal one
Rary.
last time with a blank expression, which is
I just find it bullshit that the Dottore was the one to resurrect him. They just did that for the fact that obviously they needed a reason for Dottore to, like, you know, be here and I guess Rary to be here and resurrected or whatever. So, oh yeah, Dottore resurrected me. Oh, so that's his name. Like, you're saying he collected pieces of Rary and just waited for the perfect moment to resurrect him? Sure. It would be nice, I guess, if we saw a flashback of it, but he just didn't show it. It's like, we're just, you know, going off squad.
back to when Rary walked past Dane expressionless to accept the power of the Abyss,
Yeah.
as Dane had a saddened look on his face. The main flaw with the Rary's ending wasn't him being forced to solitude, but him having his mind intact. Despite him being pierced back together, I wanted his mind to still be blurred from reality, but I do understand his ending wasn't happy since he still can't reunite with the Lindis, and I'm glad he didn't have a happy ending because the people whom he executed certainly didn't have their happy ending. Now, I think the main reason why I wanted him to be completely mad was because of how long his body was being torn apart, and accepting the power of the Abyss, I truly wish he wasn't able to remember who he was. But I definitely won't say his ending was the worst since him not having his mind intact is more of a personal wish, but let me know how you feel about Rary's ending. But the main issue I experienced with Rary was he was overshadowed by Dottore, as Dottore had stakes higher than Rary's, but it makes sense to an extent since Rary is more of a broken man while Dottore had his plan out running for a while. Overall, I think Rary was more of an introduction to the sinners, and they didn't want to make it too crazy since he's the weakest among the sinners as the rest of the
He's the weakest among the sinners, and it was just an introduction to the sinners as a whole. So that's the reason they want to two play. They just wanted to make it seem like Trevor has a fighting chance against other sinners, even though like I don't think he was even fully recovered. Like I said, definitely the other sinners will definitely be like way stronger. Like Sergiology, for example, he's pretty gonna be such a big foe when we actually fight him.
sinners are much worse and don't really have the same humanity as him.
Yeah.
Overall, Genshin's villains are nice, but sometimes they
The
use
visionary
villains as
does
a
things
build-up
that
for
we
something
have to
else
get
rather
that
than
balance
actually
Genshin eventually,
focusing
and I
on
cannot
said
wait.
villains. The Rary's villain rating is a 9 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I
But
can
as
say.
of right now, the only upcoming villains that interest me are hopefully Bolsonella and Pantalone. I feel like with Renova, she's gonna have an interesting backstory to excuse whatever her actions are, but
Generally speaking, whatever backstories they give Renova, I'm not gonna be like, oh yeah, I empathize with you. I'm not. I refuse to be like, oh yeah, 100%. That's the reason to like commit mass genocide, to commit just making people immortal to suffer, turn people into monsters like his shows. There's nothing to do that. I think she also turned people into his shows. I could be wrong, but they're all curses. I will say, the only thing that maybe can get me do that if she has chains on her, I guess, and she's being controlled by heavenly principles or whatever, maybe. But from her smug impression, from her smug look, she's not. So I doubt she's being completely controlled or whatever. It's her own doing. Like I said, they will probably give her a sad backstory, and she'll end up joining. She'll probably become playable, most likely, maybe.
they don't go with that route, just know I never said that. I'm really excited for her. But as of now, I'm glad that Genshin...
Or she'll open her eyes to the true face of life and like realize death isn't just her domain. That could be it.
It's actually taking the time to actually go through with the villains and giving them a lot more backstories. And we all know that SNES 9 is going to be super long, so they're going to take a lot of time developing their villains, so I'm really excited for that. But let me know, who do you think has the best writing as far as villains go in Genshin? And any villain that I missed that you want to talk about, please let me know down in the comments.
Like I said, you talked about mainly like main quest, that was the world quest
that we see in the background. But of course, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and well, again, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and hopefully see you guys in the next one. I'll see you in the next one, right? Alright.
Maybe. Video will be linked in the description. I will say Twice's camera hasn't turned off, it's like heating up badly crazy. Either way, without further ado, subscribe to this stuff. My favorite villain in Genshin, I actually don't know. I feel like the Fatui is just a simple answer. Like, the Fatui as a whole is probably my favorite villains in Genshin. Like, I'm gonna be honest, the only Fatui member I hated was Signora. I even hate Signora more than Dottore, but like, it's not like the fact that she obviously done worse stuff and Dottore, don't get me wrong. I think it's just the fact I had, like, the moment she first appeared, I just hated her. When she punched Venti from out of nowhere, I'm like, okay, here we go. I was like, the way she talked, it just pissed me off, rubbed me the wrong way. Not simply because of her actions, don't get me wrong. although her actions aren't justified at all. Dottore, I still hate him, but not as much as Signora, just because of that one thing. Like I can stand Dottore being on screen. But in general, my favorite F2 member would have to be Wanderer, aka X2 member. After that, it's either Sandrone or Child. I'm saying, because I'm not trying to say Colabina because she's obviously X, like Wanderer. But Colabina is pretty up there too, one of them. Either way, without further ado, Shazam, subscribe, do your stuff, and yeah.